What's up developers, it's Dari here and welcome back to a new video where we're going to dive into a pretty important subject in Laravel, which is testing. I recently started using my GitHub more and more, and I was thinking about adding a repository for every video with a usage section at the bottom, which will basically show you how the code works in text. If you are interested in this, let me know in the comment section down below so I can continue on creating content like this as well. Also, don't forget to give me a follow on GitHub. Whether you are currently a developer or you're working in a different field, we both can agree that testing is a good thing. And that obviously applies for coding as well. Testing your code is a good thing, and you are in fact supposed to do it. There are some pretty good tools out there that you can use for testing. Think about PHP Unit, Mockery, PHP Spec, Storyplay, and way more. But honestly, it can be a lot to process when you start using it as a beginner. Instead of setting up your testing environment manually, Laravel has PHP Unit integrated in all projects you create. PHP Unit is a framework-independent library that you can use for unit testing. And unit testing is a method that you can use where small pieces of code will be tested against expected results. You might wonder how and when you'll be using PHP Unit, and think about situations like crawling your site's URL, or submitting forms, or checking status codes. Up until this point, you might have heard some terms that you might not have heard before. So let's go over some of the most basic terms that you'll find in this video and whenever you search it on Google as well. The first term is actually the one that I just mentioned, which is called unit testing. Unit testing will verify that individual units of code works as expected. You can automatically generate unit tests, but I prefer to write my own. There's another type of testing, which is feature testing, where you will test the way individual units work together and you pass a message. Today's video is brought to you by Cloudways, a managed hosting platform for your applications. Cloudways has enabled businesses to scale and reach new milestones instead of worrying about server hassles. With reliable 24/7 support, Cloudways offers complete peace of mind from server-level nightmares. Furthermore, its superior tools and works enhance your productivity so you can focus on creating incredible experiences with your applications. It's a fast managed solution for agencies, SMBs, and e-commerce businesses. What I personally like about Cloudways is their slogan, moving dreams forward. We've got regression tests where you're going to describe exactly what a user should be able to do and make sure that the application won't stop. We've got HTTP tests, which allows you to make simple HTTP requests, so get, post, put, patch, and delete. We've got authentication responses, where the application will be tested in authentication and authorization. And we got database tests, which are tools and assertions to make it easier to test database-driven applications. I think it's time to dive into the code and go over some of the basic stuff that Laravel adds by default. You don't need to configure anything for your testing environment, which makes the process a lot easier. As you can see, I've already created a Laravel project, and in the root of any Laravel project, you can find a folder called tests. If you have watched my previous Laravel videos, you know that we actually never touched on the test folder. If we open it, now let me make my sidebar a little bit bigger, you'll see two subfolders called feature and unit, and two PHP files, which is the create application and the testcase.php file. The feature subfolder consists of tests that will cover the interaction between multiple units. And in the unit subfolder, you'll find tests for one unit of your code. If we open both subfolders, you'll see that both of them have an example.test file inside of it, which has a, simple test example method inside of it, which you can run. If we open the creates application file, you'll see that this file actually isn't a class, but it is a trait. And if we then open the test case, you'll see that this trait of creates application is being used right here. If we then open one of our example tests, you can indeed see that test case is being extended, so the trait of creates application as well. Now, if we take a look at the method that we have by default right here, the test example, you'll see that there isn't a lot of code, which is actually a good thing because you need to keep your test method small. Inside the test_example method, you can see a new object called response, which is equal to this get /URI. Then the response will check if the assert status is equal to 200, which is true because the / is a route that has been defined by default. Let's test it out. Let's open the routes folder, web.php, and right here, you can see that the / endpoint does exist. Obviously, one of the most important things is running your test. Luckily, Laravel makes it very easy for us to run our test through the terminal. Let's open the integrated terminal of Visual Studio Code. And let me make it a little bit bigger. All right. Keep in mind that there are two different commands to run your test. The first one is to run the PHP unit inside the vendor directory. So inside the Laravel test folder of our CLI, we need to run /vendor /bin /php unit. If we hit enter, you'll see an output which might look a little bit weird for you. So let's go over everything we're seeing right now. First, you can see that PHP unit is using version 9.5.9 and it has been created by Sebastian Bergman and it's open source, so contributors have added stuff in it as well. Then you'll see two dots right here, which might not seem important to you, but it actually indicates that we tried to perform two tests. We'll both have passed, as you can see right here. We have a score of 100%. So where are these two dots coming from? Like I said, we have two example test files who have both been run, and let me open the unit folder as well. Right here, you can see that it's checking if the assert true, and we're passing in a true, which is always equal to true. Now, the second method that you can use in order to run your test is the php artisan test command. So let's perform it. Let's say php artisan test. Hit enter, and as you can see, it has been outputted a little bit different than the previous command, but I actually do like this method quite a lot. I find it a very clear structured overview of your past test. So you'll see the unit folder right here, which has an example method. We have a examples test inside the features folder, who also has an example file. Honestly, it really doesn't matter which method you'll be using, because you'll end up with the same exact result. Now, the command that we just performed comes from the PHP unit file inside the root of our directory. Let's open it. Let's search for it first. It's right here. Let me make it a little bit smaller again. All right. Right here, you'll find a place where you can configure specific options for your test. There is actually quite a lot of code right here, but the most important piece of code is the test suites right here. This will basically make sure that PHP unit is able to run tests from the right here ./test/unit folder and the features folder. Now the output that we had in the terminal is whenever your test passed the test. Let me show you what will happen if it doesn't pass the test. The best possible way is to create a new test, which can obviously be done through the terminal. What we need to do is to run php artisan make test followed with a test name. So let's call it user test. This will create a new test inside the feature folder. Let's open it. Right here, you can see the same test_example method, which will check if the /URI exists. And if it can, it will send back a method called assert_status, which accepts one parameter. And in our case, we're sending back a 200, which is okay. This will pass the test because we do have a /route defined like I showed you before. Let's run it and test it out. Let's say php artisan test. Right here, you can see that we created the user test and we have a method called example, which has passed the test. By the way, it will remove the test underscore from the method name. So let's change the URI real quick to, let's say, /test, which we do not have defined, so we should get an error message. Inside the CLI, hit the arrow up and hit enter. And right here, our first failed test. Let's scroll up and see what the error message is. One thing I actually really like about PHP unit in Laravel is the error message it sends back. Not the word fail right here, but actually this piece of code that you can't find. It's saying that it's expecting a status code of 200, which we have defined, but it has received 404. And if you have followed my Laravel API course, you should know that 404 means not found. So the route does not exist. When working with many tests, you'll see that this piece of text right here comes in clutch, because it will show you how many tests have either failed or passed. Alright, the command that we performed in order to create our user test created a file inside the feature folder. The same command can be used to generate a unit test, but we do need to add an additional flag. If we hit the arrow up until the make command, hit space, and add a double dash followed with the text of unit. Hit enter. You will see that the test has been created successfully, which might be weird because you already got a user test file. Like I said, this will create a file inside the unit folder, as you can see right here, rather than the feature folder. If we run the php artisan test command again, we still have a fail, so we need to change that actually. Alright, hit the arrow up. Right here, you'll see that our user test file passed from the feature folder, which is alright, and also from the units folder. It's finally time to create a couple tests that aren't as basic as the example Laravel provides for us. Now the simplest way to test it is through the authentication scaffolding because it allows us to use the user's model. So what we need to do inside the CLI is to perform composer, require Laravel /UI. Then with the UI that we just pulled in, we can basically say PHP, artisan, UI, and let's say React. We're not going to use a front end. Space, double dash, auth. Hit enter. All right. Let's run npm install, double ampersand, npm run dev. This might take a second because there are quite some files in here. Now that we're setting up our stuff, let's also create a database. So let's say MySQL, perform the create database, and let's call it Laravel_testing. Write down exit. We need to set up our credentials in the .env file. My database name is Laravel_testing, and my password is Dari1234. Save it, close it off. Now the last step is to migrate our migrations. So let's say PHP artisan migrate. That was a typo. All right. Right now, I want to perform a couple simple unit tests inside the user test.php file from the units folder. So let's open it and let me close off the other one. Let's remove the default one that we got. And the first unit that we're going to perform is called public function. Let's say test underscore login underscore form. In here, we're going to check if the /login endpoint exists. So let's say variable response is equal to this get, and what we're going to get is a endpoint or URI of /login. On the line below, we're going to say response assert status, and the status will be 200. As you can see right here, we're getting an error message because we are using an undefined method get. Now there is some kind of bug inside Laravel which does not recognize this test case. So what we need to do is to say that we want to use tests \test case. And if we scroll down, you can see that it recognizes the get method now. All right, so we're ready to perform our test. Let's say PHP artisan test. And right here, you'll see that our test has passed the login form. So what's next? What else do we want to test? Well, we can surely test the login validation. So right below our test login form, let's create a new one. Let's call it public function test underscore user underscore duplication. What we're going to do is to make sure that the user can't have the same name and email. And this will automatically be done by Laravel behind the scenes because we pulled in the authentication scaffolding, but it's always a good thing to double check. We got to make two users, which we will then compare to each other. It's not a complete unit test, but it's more like an integration test or feature test because usually you'll be interacting with a database. So let's create a new user right here. So user1 is equal to the user model, pull it in, colon, make. Let's pass in an array inside the make method and hit enter. We have a key value pair right here, where the key will be the database column. So name, pointer, and we're going to call it, let's say, John Doe. And let's do the same thing for the email, which will be johndoe@gmail.com. Let's copy our user1 and let's paste it right here and change the variable to user2. Let's change the name to, let's say, Dari, and the email to Dari@gmail. If we go right below our user2, we have to make sure that it asserts something. So what we're going to do is to say that this assert true, which accepts a condition. And what we're going to check is to see if the user1 name is not equal to the name of user2. Save it. Inside the C line, hit the arrow up and run our test. Scroll up and right here, you'll see that user duplication has passed the test. This seems like a test you probably won't be creating that often, but the main focus on this test is the fact that you can test a single class or method, even when the object under the test are framework connected. Let's create one more unit test before we continue on. Right below our method, we need to create a new one. So let's say public function test underscore delete underscore user. Right there, we're going to create a new user through the factory. Let's say that we have a new object of user, which is equal to the user model, factory. We're going to chain the count methods to the factory, and we're going to pass in a 1 to create one user, and we're going to make. So what we then can do is to get that object and say that we want to get user, first. So whenever you want to delete a user, you obviously get to make sure that the user exists. And that can be done through an if statement. So let's say if. What we're going to do is to see if user even exists. And inside the if statement, we're going to say, well, if it does exist, delete it for me. Once again, we have to pass an assertion. So let's say this object of assert true is true. Save it. Let's run our test. Scroll up and you can see that the lead user has also passed the test. All right, it's time to move on to the next type of test, which will be HTTP testing. We have actually seen one of them inside the test login form. If we scroll up, where we're getting the /login endpoint. Now we can obviously change this up to the put, post, patch, or delete method as well, which will basically sum up all available HTTP methods. As you can see on my screen right now, every single method accepts an URI as their first param. Right here. We got the get, post, put, patch, delete. It accepts an URI as the first param, which will be the endpoint of the route. The get method accepts an header, and the post, put, patch, and delete have a data array as well. Now it's also quite important to keep in mind that you do need to return a response object that will represent the HTTP response. This will not be the Illuminate response object that we are all familiar with, but it will be an instance of the Illuminate Foundation Testing Test Response, which is basically a wrapper around the response object with some additional assertions for testing. There are more than 40 available assertions method that you can perform on the request object. So it will be difficult to cover them all, but I will try to go over the most basic and interesting ones. Alright, enough talked. Let's get back to the code editor, and I want to test out one more HTTP request because you understand that the rest of them work in the same exact way. If we perform the PHP artisan route list command, and let me actually make it a little bit bigger and zoom out. Ooh, I hope you can read it, I'm not sure. You'll see that the register endpoint is a post request. So let's create a test for this route. Let me zoom in, make the terminal smaller. Right at the bottom, let's create a new test. Public function test underscore it underscore stores underscore new underscore users. So what we're going to do is to set the response object equal to this post. Like I've showed you before, we got to pass in a URI as the first endpoint of /register, comma, space, brackets, hit enter, which will be the data array that you also have to pass through. When we're going to register an account, we got to at least fill in the name. We've got the email. We got the password. And the last one is the password underscore confirmation. For the name, let's set it equal to Dari. The email is dari@gmail.com. Give it a password of Dari1234. And let's copy it and paste it in the password confirmation. Right below our post request, we're going to return our response object like I showed you a couple minutes ago. So response, and we're going to chain the assert redirect method And whenever a user is registered, we want to send them back to the /home endpoint. This should work. Let's save it and let's go to the terminal. Let's run php artisan test. Right here, we have no fails. And if we scroll up, you'll see that the it stores new user test has been passed. It's time to move into database test. Laravel offers a lot of tools and assertions in order to make it easier to test your database-driven applications. We have created a test before where we looked if we could create a user or not. To be honest, it's not the most efficient way. You rather want to make an HTTP call to store your endpoint and then assert to see if that package exists in the database. So we have two primary assertions that we can use. The first one is the assert database has. This will basically look inside the database and sees if data exists, which is a value that you have to pass in. The second method is the assert database missing. As the name implies, it's going to check whether a given value is missing in the database. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the assert database has method. How does it look in SQL? Think about it. You're going to perform a where statement. You will pass in a value where MySQL will check in the database whether the value exists or not. Alright, I'm done with all the theoretical stuff. Our users table is empty at the moment, so it can't check if a user exists. So we got to make sure that we add a row there. I want to do it through a seeder, so what we can do is to say php artisan make me a seeder called users table seeder. If we open the database folder in the root of our directory, seeders and the users table seeder, we have a run method where we're basically going to say db, pull it in, colon table. The table name will be in single quote users. We're going to chain the insert method, which accepts an array. Hit enter. The name will be Dari. The email will be dari@gmail.com. And we have a password, which will be the hash method. Pull the illuminate vacate in, colon make a new password. Now the last step is to run our database seeder. So inside the CLI, let me actually save it. Let's run php artisan db seed -- class, and the class is users table seeder. Hit enter, and we got a typo right here, I guess. Apparently I have a user, that's weird. MySQL, use Laravel _testing. Select all from users. That's weird, it has added it. So, well, let's just perform an exit. And let's close off our users table seeder, and right below our method, right below our last method, we need to create a new one. So let's say public function test _database. And in here, we're going to say this. So we're going to call the assert database has method. Now, you need to pass in two parameters inside this method. The first value will be in single quotes, the table name where you want to search in. In our case, we got to say users, because we want to search for a user inside the users table. The second param, so a comma, will be an array with a key value pair. So let's say brackets, hit enter. Right here, we're going to pass in a key value pair. The key will be name in our case, because we're going to search through the column with a name of name. Then we're going to tell our test, well, look for a value called Dari. Now our seeder worked because we have a user inside a database. So what we can do is to run our test. And right here, if we scroll up, you can see that the database test has been passed. The second method was the assert database missing method. So let's replace has with assert database missing. Let's keep our key value pair as it is right now, because we should be getting an error message. Save it and let's run it. All right, one test has failed. If we scroll up, you'll see that the error message says that it failed asserting that a row in the table users does not match the attributes. So the user does exist. If we change it to John, save it, run our test, you'll see that it has been passed. The next type of test will be testing our seeders. There's a reason why we created the users table seeder, because we're going to test if that works properly right now. If we create a new method right here with the name of public function test underscore if underscore seeders works, we're going to perform a command that will test all seeders first. It's very simple. All we got to do is to say this seed. What this will do is, actually let me add a comment, is seed all seeders in the seeders folder. Now this command is pretty much equal to php artisan db :seed. Save it. Let's run our test. One risked. And let's see what the output is. This test did not perform any assertions. Well, that's actually true because we're not actually doing anything. It's also not an error message, which is actually quite good. This was it for this video where I showed you the basics of testing in Laravel. In the next video, we're going to dive into sessions, cache, and cookies. For now, this was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave this video a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button.